The Duke's American Problem. Chapter 1. The American Invasion. London, 1885. The ballroom of Lansdowne House blazed with the light of 500 candles, their flames multiplied tenfold by the great crystal chandeliers that hung like frozen waterfalls from the painted ceiling. Below, the aristocracy of England swirled in a kaleidoscope of silk and satin, diamonds flashing at throats and wrists, medals glinting on chests, the entire magnificent spectacle held together by centuries of tradition and the unspoken understanding that everyone present knew exactly who everyone else was. Amelia Grace Bambridge knew no one. She stood at the edge of the dance floor beside her aunt, Mrs. Cornelia Vanderbilt, and felt the weight of 200 years of English history pressing down upon her like a physical thing. The gown she wore, gold silk from Lyon, trimmed with Brussels lace, fitted by a French modiste who had demanded 3 fittings and charged what her father's Pennsylvania steel mills earned in a week, was perfect. Her hair, dark and thick, had been arranged by a lady's maid who spoke only in whispers. Her gloves, reaching past her elbows, were so fine they felt like a second skin. None of it mattered. She was still an American, still an outsider. Still, in the eyes of half the room, the daughter of a man who had made his fortune with his hands and his wits rather than inheriting it from ancestors who had done the same thing 500 years earlier. "The tall one by the pillar," her aunt murmured behind her fan, "is Lord Richard Mountford, eldest son of the Earl of Westbrook. His father is failing, consumption they say, so the title will pass within the year. He needs money for the estate. His mother was a Howard, so the blood is impeccable. A strong prospect." Amelia followed her aunt's gaze. Lord Richard was handsome in a bland English way, fair hair, regular features, a pleasant smile. He was surrounded by a cluster of young women who laughed too loudly at his every word. He looked like a man who had never been forced to think very hard about anything. "Next to him," Cornelia continued, "is Mr. Algernon Finch, younger son of the Marquis of Salisbury. No title, but excellent connections. He's looking for an heiress to fund his political ambitions. Clever, but ruthless. Handle with care." "And the one who looks like he's attending a funeral?" Amelia asked. Her aunt's fan stopped moving. "Ah, that is the Duke of Alderworth." Amelia looked again. The man in question stood apart from the crowd, near a pillar wreathed in ivy, his expression one of such profound displeasure that it seemed to create a force field around him. He was tall, taller than any other man in the room, with dark hair that fell carelessly over a brow furrowed in what looked like permanent disapproval. His evening clothes were immaculate, but worn with an indifference that suggested he had better things to think about than fashion. He held a glass of champagne as though it were a scientific specimen he was analysing for impurities. "He looks charming," Amelia observed dryly. "The Duke of Alderworth," Cornelia recited, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper, "is the catch of the season. William Henry Cavendish Scott, 28 years old, immensely proud, immensely stubborn, and, unfortunately for him, immensely poor. His father, the 6th Duke, was a gambler and an art collector. He filled Alderworth Park with old masters and emptied its coffers. The current Duke spends most of his time in Derbyshire trying to squeeze enough rent from his tenant farmers to keep the roof from caving in." "How poor is immensely poor?" "30,000 a year would barely cover the estate's expenses. He has perhaps half that. The house hasn't been properly maintained in a generation. The roof leaks. The attics are full of bats. The farms are outdated and barely productive. He needs a wife with a very large fortune, and he needs her quickly." Amelia studied the Duke with new interest, a man in need of money, resistant to the very social games that might save him. That was a puzzle. And Amelia Bambridge had never met a puzzle she didn't want to solve. "He's been on the market for 2 seasons, Cornelia continued, "but he's famously difficult, terrifies the debutantes, won't dance, won't flirt, and has a habit of lecturing anyone who gets too close on the moral decay of the modern age. His mother, the Dowager Duchess, is desperate for him to marry money, but she's even more desperate for him to marry someone suitable, which in her language means someone who will curtsy and stay quiet. "I don't curtsy," Amelia said, "and I've never been quiet in my life." Precisely why he might find you interesting, or precisely why he might loathe you on sight, it's impossible to predict with that family. Amelia watched the Duke. A group of young women, pretty and nervous, fluttered near him like moths drawn to a particularly forbidding flame. He turned his head, his gaze passing over them with the dispassionate interest of a man observing a herd of particularly silly sheep. He didn't see them at all. Then his eyes moved across the room and met hers. The sensation was electric, a jolt of pure awareness that seemed to stop time. Amelia had been looked at by many men, admiringly, appraisingly, covetously, dismissively. She had never been looked at like this. It wasn't interest exactly or appraisal. It was recognition, as if he had suddenly seen something in a crowded room that he had been searching for without knowing it. Amelia, for the first time in her life, felt the urge to look away first. She did not. She held his gaze, a silent challenge. After a long moment, the corner of his mouth twitched, the barest hint of amusement, before a formidable woman with a face like a displeased horse descended upon him and broke the spell. "The dragon," Cornelia murmured. "His mother." Amelia smiled slowly. The game, she thought, had just become interesting. 3 nights later, at a musicale hosted by Lady Jersey, Amelia engineered her introduction. She had done her research. She knew the Duke had been coerced into attending. She knew his opinions on modern music, disapproving. On the Italian soprano, who was the evening's entertainment, she would be competent but soulless. And on the entire institution of the musicale, a waste of an evening that could be spent doing something useful, like reading agricultural reports. She positioned herself near a potted palm, looking, she hoped, both intellectual and approachable. When she saw him enter, his expression one of pained duty, she contrived to drop her fan directly in his path. He stopped. He looked at the fan. He looked at her. "You have dropped something," he said. His voice was deep, resonant, the kind of voice that could fill a ballroom without effort or fill a drawing room with quiet intimacy. "So I have," Amelia replied, making no move to retrieve the fan. "It's a fan, a device used by ladies to create a breeze, or, as I've recently learned, to communicate a vast and complex secret language. It's a form of semaphore for the romantically inclined." He stared at her, utterly nonplussed. "Is it?" "Indeed. For instance, if I were to draw it sharply through my hand, it would mean I hate you. Placing it near my heart means you have won my love." She looked up at him, her eyes sparkling. "I'm currently trying to decide which signal would be most appropriate for this moment." For a heartbeat, he was motionless. Then the corner of his mouth twitched, that same almost smile she had seen at the ball. He bent and retrieved the fan, handing it to her with a slight bow. "I would advise against either, Miss Banbridge, Miss Amelia Banbridge, of New York." She took the fan, letting her fingers brush against his for the briefest moment. "And you are the Duke of Alderworth. I've heard a great deal about you." All of it, I'm sure, scurrilous. But the stiffness in his shoulders had eased. "I confess, I've heard nothing of you, Miss Banbridge, but I've seen your countrymen at work. They're a busy, industrious people. They seem intent on filling the world with things." "Things?" Amelia repeated, her smile widening. "You mean steel and railroads and telegraphs, those sorts of useless things?" "Precisely. Noisy, smoky, intrusive things that disturb the peace of the countryside and the dignity of labour." Amelia felt a thrill, not of offence, but of pure intellectual engagement. Here was a man with an opinion, a philosophy, however wrong-headed it might be. It was infinitely more stimulating than the vapid chatter about horseflesh and opera dancers she had endured all week. And you object to them on principle? The things, I mean. I object to the philosophy they represent, this modern obsession with speed, with efficiency, with profit above all else. It's a sickness. It replaces the skilled hand of the craftsman with the mindless clatter of a machine. It turns men into slaves to the clock and the counting house. My own county of Derbyshire was ravaged by it 60 years ago, he continued, his voice hardening with passion. Good men, skilled framework knitters, saw their livings destroyed by wide frames that allowed one unskilled man to do the work of 10. They rose up, of course. They were called Luddites. Destroyers of machinery, Amelia said. Vandals. Desperate men, he corrected. They weren't fighting progress, Miss Banbridge. They were fighting for their lives, for their families, for a way of life that had sustained them for generations. They were fighting against being treated as disposable parts in a grand, impersonal machine. They were right to smash the frames. They were right to protest a future that had no place for them. Amelia was stunned. She had heard factory owners rail against unions and politicians debate tariffs. But she had never heard an aristocrat, a man born to unimaginable privilege, speak with such raw passion for the plight of common labourers. She looked at him anew. This was not the petulant disdain of a man upset by the smell of coal smoke. This was a deeply held, almost religious conviction. It's a romantic notion, she said carefully, to believe one can halt the tide of progress with a sledgehammer. But the world moves forward, Your Grace. It always has. The question isn't how to stop it, but how to steer it. Steer it. He looked at her with new interest, a glimmer of respect in his dark eyes. And who, pray, is wise enough to do the steering? The industrialists with their single-minded greed, the politicians with their empty rhetoric. Perhaps, Amelia said, holding his gaze, it's those who understand both the value of what's being lost and the potential of what's being gained. The music struck up, a waltz, light and lilting. For a moment they stood in silence, the air between them crackling with unspoken arguments. He offered his hand. Miss Banbridge, would you care to test your theory on the dance floor? It is, at least, a form of movement not yet powered by steam. Amelia placed her hand in his. I would be delighted, Your Grace. Though I must warn you, I'm a very efficient dancer. I don't like to waste a single step. As he led her to the floor, Amelia's mind was racing with a chilling, electric thought. He is a Luddite. He hated the mills. He wanted to see them fail. And Amelia Grace Banbridge, heiress and pragmatist, was the silent primary investor in the Derbyshire Automated Loom Company, the very company building the machines that were even now being installed in the mills along the rivers that ran through his dukedom. Chapter 2. The Art of War. The waltz was, for Amelia, a revelation. The Duke held her with firm, correct propriety, yet his hand on her waist was a point of warm, distracting pressure. He moved with natural grace, guiding her through the swirling crowds with an assurance that made her feel, for the first time in years, like she was not in control. It was a terrifyingly pleasant sensation. You dance very well for a man who claims to hate his era, she said, slightly breathless. I don't hate my era, Miss Banbridge. I hate its haste, its carelessness. A waltz, at its best, is a conversation. It requires attention, respect, a certain timeless give and take. It's not a race. He looked down at her. Tell me, do you ride? I do, astride. His eyebrows shot up. Astride. It's far more practical. Side saddles are a contraption designed by men to ensure women remain decorative and helpless. I prefer to have actual control of my mount. She smiled sweetly. I find it translates well to other areas of life. A genuine laugh, low and surprised, escaped him. It transformed his severe features, making him look younger, less guarded. You are a most unusual woman, Miss Banbridge. So I've been told. usually by men who find it an insult. I intend it as the highest compliment. In my experience, most people, especially women of marriageable age, are so relentlessly the same. They're like prints from a factory. You, however, are an original. The word factory hung in the air between them, heavy with unintended irony. Amelia smiled and said nothing. After that night, the Duke of Alderworth could not stay away. He called upon her the next day, a breach of etiquette so profound it sent Aunt Cornelia into a flurry of delighted panic. He sent her a book of Derbyshire poetry, which was, he admitted in the accompanying note, terrible, but it will give you a sense of the landscape I'm trying to defend. He appeared at every ball, every soirée, every ridiculously pointless garden party Amelia attended, always seeking her out, always eager to resume their verbal sparring. It was a campaign, and Amelia was both the prize and the opposing general. He took her for a drive in Hyde Park, his perfectly matched bays a testament to the one area where his frugality did not extend. As they bowled along the dusty path, he launched into a passionate diatribe against a new steam-powered plough he had seen demonstrated. It's an abomination. It tears at the earth without understanding it. The man who drives it feels nothing of the soil, of its needs, its moods, its brute force without wisdom. And yet, Amelia countered, it can plough a field in a quarter of the time. That means more crops, more food, lower prices for the very labourers you champion. Is that not a good thing? It's a good thing only if you measure the world in bushels and pence. What of the men who lose their livelihoods? What of the bond between a man and the land he works? Those things have no price, Miss Bambridge, and they're being lost forever. At a soirée, he cornered her near the refreshment table. I've been reading about your American factories, these Lowell mills in Massachusetts. They fill the air with lint, the lungs with disease, and they work young girls to exhaustion for a pittance. They call it progress. I call it slavery of a new and insidious kind. Amelia knew about the Lowell mills. She also knew about the vast, impersonal steel mills of Pennsylvania, where her own fortune was being forged in heat and danger. She felt a flicker of guilt, foreign and unwelcome, and quashed it. They're paid wages, Your Grace. They're free to leave. That's not slavery. And those mills produce the cloth that allows people like that woman over there, she nodded toward a lady swathed in violet silk, to purchase 7 new gowns a season. Your precious, timeless society is built on the back of that industry, whether you choose to see it or not. He looked at her, his eyes searching. You defend it with a passion that seems personal. Are you merely being contrary, or do you truly believe in this mechanized hell? Amelia thought of her father, his hands clean, but his mind forever in the grimy, glorious chaos of his mills. She thought of the thousands of men who depended on him for their bread. I believe in choice, Your Grace. I believe in a world where a man can choose to work with his hands or choose to build a machine that helps him work better. You want to preserve one way of life by crushing all others. That's not preservation. That's tyranny. The battles were thrilling, intoxicating. With every clash, the respect between them deepened. He was not just a stubborn reactionary. He was a man of principle, fighting for a world he loved against a tide he feared. And she was not just a shallow heiress. She was a woman of intellect and conviction, unafraid to challenge him at every turn. But with every victory she won in their debates, the shadow of her secret grew longer. She saw the passion in his eyes when he spoke of his Derbyshire, his people. He was not fighting for his own comfort. His estate was a monument to his beliefs. He had refused to allow a single mill on his land, turning away lucrative offers, preferring to let his fields lie fallow and his tenants farm in the old way, even as his debts mounted. He was, she realized with a pang that felt dangerously like tenderness, an utterly honourable man, and she was lying to him by omission every single day. The invitation to Alderworth Park arrived like a summons to judgment. The Dowager Duchess of Alderworth requests the pleasure of the company of Miss Amelia Bambridge for a fortnight in the country. Aunt Cornelia was beside herself. "It's the final seal of approval, Amelia. A house party. You'll be alone with him, away from the prying eyes of London. This is it, my dear. You have him in the palm of your hand." Amelia stared at the thick, cream-coloured card. She did not feel like a conqueror. She felt like a spy being invited to tour the fortress she was about to betray. Derbyshire was breathtaking. The rolling green hills, the swift, clear rivers, the ancient, rugged beauty of the Peak District. It was a landscape that seemed to exist outside of time. And at its heart stood Alderworth Park, a sprawling, magnificent Tudor manor that radiated quiet, weathered dignity. It was not a gilded palace. It was a home, a living piece of history. The Duke was a different man here. The tense, guarded London socialite vanished, replaced by an attentive, relaxed host. He showed her the long gallery with its faded portraits, the library with its ceiling-high shelves of leather-bound books, the gardens that tumbled down to the river in a profusion of colour. He introduced her to his tenants, gruff farmers and their shy wives, who looked at him with an affection that bordered on reverence. He knew their children's names, remembered their ailments, cared about their harvests. On the third day, they rode out together, she, true to her word, on a spirited chestnut mare and riding astride in a scandalously practical divided skirt. He led her to a hilltop that overlooked the valley. Below them, the river wound its way toward the distant town of Cheadle. "Do you see that?" He pointed to a cluster of buildings on the riverbank, their new slate roofs gleaming in the sun. "That's a new mill, the Derbyshire Automated Loom Company. They moved in 6 months ago. They brought in their machines, their managers, their progress." Amelia's blood ran cold. She knew that mill. She had seen the blueprints. She had approved the final investment. "They're already drawing workers away from the farms," he continued, his voice heavy with sorrow. "Promising high wages, regular hours. They don't promise what it will do to their souls, to their families, to the very fabric of this community. I've tried everything within my power to stop them, but I have no jurisdiction over that land. It's a blot on my valley, a wound in my heart." Amelia looked at the mill, a neat, efficient building that represented the future. Then she looked at the man beside her, his face etched with genuine, profound grief. She thought of the poems he had given her, the careful way he spoke to his servants, the love he poured into every stone of his dilapidated home. She saw the world he was trying to protect, a world of connection, tradition, human scale. And she saw, with horrifying clarity, that she held the hammer that was helping to destroy it. She opened her mouth. The words were there, a confession burning on her tongue. "I am the one, Your Grace. It's my money that built that mill, my belief in that future you hate." But she could not say them. The fear of losing him, of seeing that look of sorrow turn to contempt, was too great. She remained silent, the lie solidifying between them like a wall of ice. Chapter 3. The Reckoning. That evening, there was a ball at a neighbouring estate. Amelia, feeling raw and exposed after their afternoon ride, sought refuge in the garden. The air was cool and fragrant with night-scented stock. She walked along a gravel path, trying to compose herself, when she heard voices from behind a high yew hedge. It was the Dowager Duchess and another elderly lady, their conversation carrying clearly in the still night air. Extraordinary, really. One hears such things about these American girls. Their fathers are all in trade, you know. This one's father is a steel magnate. Made his fortune during that dreadful war of theirs, I believe. Selling cannonballs, no doubt. Amelia froze, her face burning. "Oh, I know," the other voice clucked. "But one must be practical. A title needs a roof, and a roof needs money. They say her settlement is enormous, enough to put the entire estate to rights." "Yes," the Dowager Duchess said, her voice dripping with condescension. She's a necessary evil, a bit too sharp, of course, too much opinion, but William seems diverted, and he's so stubborn about his principles. He would let the place crumble around his ears for the sake of a weaver. It's our duty, as his mother, to be practical for him. The girl's money will save Alderworth. Her breeding, or lack thereof, can be dealt with later. A few seasons, a firm hand, and we can mould her into something passable. She will learn her place. Amelia stood perfectly still, the words washing over her like acid. She was a necessary evil, a source of funds to be tolerated, then moulded and subdued. She was not an investor in her own future. She was a commodity being purchased for the renovation of a noble house. The Duke's attentions, his respect, their passionate debates. Was it all just a strategic campaign orchestrated by his mother to secure the Banbridge fortune? She fled back into the house, her eyes stinging with unshed tears of humiliation and rage. A short while later, the Duke found her on a deserted terrace. He looked concerned. "Miss Banbridge, are you unwell? My mother said you seemed out of spirits." Amelia looked at him, searching his face for the truth. She saw only genuine worry. It confused her further. "I'm merely tired, Your Grace. The country air, perhaps, is too invigorating." He moved closer, his voice dropping to a low, intimate timbre that made her knees weak. "Amelia, I hope you know that you're more than just an amusement to me. These past weeks, you've challenged me, infuriated me, and delighted me in equal measure. I've never met anyone like you." He reached out and took her hand. His touch was warm, sending a shiver through her. "I know we disagree on almost everything. I know you think me a relic, a Luddite clinging to a dying world. But I believe that a world without room for you is a world I don't wish to inhabit. I find myself hoping you might consider staying in it, with me." He was going to propose. Here, under the stars, with the sound of music drifting from the house. The moment she had planned for, the goal of her entire season, was about to be achieved, and it felt like a trap. She pulled her hand away, her heart pounding a frantic, panicked rhythm. "No, no, you mustn't. You don't know me. You don't know anything about me." "I know enough," he said gently. "I know you're brave and brilliant. I know you're honest." The word was a slap. Honest. She was the least honest person in the entire county. She thought of the mill in the valley. She thought of his mother's words. She was a necessary evil, a transaction. But he was looking at her as if she were something precious. Panic won. She turned and fled back into the house, leaving him alone on the terrace, a puzzled and hurt expression on his face. The next morning, Amelia could not face him. She sent her regrets to the breakfast table, claiming a megrim. She spent the hours staring out the window, her mind a battlefield. She loved him. The realization struck her with the force of a physical blow. She loved his passion, his integrity, his ridiculous quixotic quest to save a world that was already slipping away. She loved the man, not the Duke. But she had helped build the machine that was destroying that world, and his family saw her as nothing more than a bank vault in a pretty dress. Her escape came in the form of a telegram, forwarded from London. It was from her father's chief partner. "Stop. Derbyshire Mill. Exceeding expectations. Stop. New looms doubling output. Stop. Your share of quarterly profits fortunate. Stop. Details follow by post. Stop." It was addressed to her, as was all her business correspondence, to avoid suspicion. A maid had brought it to her room. She read it 3 times, a cold, sick feeling settling in her stomach. Derbyshire Mill, the one in the valley, the one he had pointed to with such sorrow, the one her money was making a fortunate success. Her secret was not just a harmless omission. It was a declaration of war. She had to leave. She had to think. She penned a note to Aunt Cornelia, claiming sudden illness and an urgent need to return to London to consult a physician. She would make her escape before the noon nuncheon. It was cowardly, but it was the only way. But as she crept down the grand staircase, valise in hand, she heard his voice from the study. The door was ajar. "I don't care about the cost, Hardwick," he was saying to his estate manager. "I will not have that mill on my land. If they're drawing water from the river, we must have a solicitor look at the riparian rights. There must be some legal means to slow them down, to make their existence as difficult as possible. We cannot let them win. We cannot let that mechanized blight spread." Amelia stood frozen on the stairs, her escape route cut off by the sound of his voice. A voice she loved, now hardened with cold resolve to destroy the very thing that had made her fortune. At that moment, the study door opened wider and the Dowager Duchess emerged. She saw Amelia on the stairs, valise in hand. Her sharp eyes took in everything, the luggage, the pale face, the guilty start. "Miss Banbridge," she said, her voice silky and dangerous. "How fortuitous. I was just coming to find you. My son has a matter he wishes to discuss. It's of the utmost importance." Before Amelia could protest, the Dowager Duchess had taken her arm with a grip of surprising strength and propelled her into the study. The Duke looked up from his papers, surprise and a flicker of hope in his eyes. "Amelia, are you well? I was so worried about you last night." "Your Grace," the Dowager Duchess announced, steering Amelia to a chair, "has something he wishes to ask you. Something that will secure the future of this family. I will leave you to it." She shot her son a look of pure command and swept out, closing the door behind her. The silence in the room was absolute. The Duke looked at Amelia, his expression a mixture of hope and confusion. He walked toward her. "Amelia, I know I startled you last night. I shouldn't have been so abrupt, but I cannot pretend any longer. I love you. I love your mind, your spirit, your courage. I know we have our differences, but I believe they make us stronger. I believe we can build a life together, a bridge between your new world and my old one." He took a deep breath and got down on one knee. "Amelia Banbridge, will you do me the very great honor of becoming my wife?" Amelia looked down at him, the man she loved, the man whose world she had helped to undermine, the man whose mother saw her as a necessary evil. The truth pressed against her lips, a physical force demanding release. Slowly, mechanically, she reached into her pocket and pulled out the telegram. She held it out to him. He took it, his brow furrowed in confusion. He read it once, then twice. The hope in his eyes died, replaced first by incomprehension, then by dawning, awful understanding. He looked from the paper to her face, his own face pale. "Your share of the quarterly profits," he read aloud, his voice flat and hollow. "Derbyshire Mill, the one in the valley." He stood up, letting the telegram fall to the floor. "You." "It's me," Amelia whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm the investor. I'm the one who built it." Chapter 4. A Future Forged. The silence that followed was worse than any shouted accusation. He simply stared at her, his dark eyes stripped of all warmth, all the admiration she had come to cherish. They were the eyes of a stranger. "All of it," he said, his voice a low monotone. "The walks, the rides, the debates, the waltz. Was it all a game, a way to get closer to your investment, to assess the damage firsthand?" The accusation was so brutal, so unfair, that it jolted Amelia out of her frozen misery. "No, how dare you? The debates were real. My feelings are real." "Your feelings?" He let out a harsh, incredulous laugh. "You who see the world as a ledger book, you have feelings. Forgive me if I find that difficult to reconcile with the woman who saw me pour my heart out about that very mill and said nothing. You let me stand on that hill and mourn its existence, knowing you held the purse strings that made it possible. You let me make a fool of myself." Amelia flinched. The memory of that moment on the hilltop was a fresh, raw wound. "I should have told you. I know that now. I was a coward. I was afraid." "Afraid of what? That I might not want to marry your money if I knew where it came from?" His voice dripped with bitter sarcasm. "No." The tears she had been holding back finally spilled over. "I was afraid of losing you. I was afraid that this, what I feel for you, would be destroyed by the one thing I couldn't change. I'm not my father's business, William. I'm not just a pile of steel mill stocks. I'm the woman who loves you. Can you not see the difference?" He stared at her, his jaw tight. "What I see is a woman who sat in my home, accepted my hospitality, listened to my deepest fears, and played a part. You played me for a fool, Amelia. You and my mother, and every other person in London who sees me as a title to be purchased." The mention of his mother cut her. "Your mother," Amelia said, her voice gaining desperate strength, "was just yesterday explaining to her friend in the garden that I was a necessary evil, that my money would save Alderworth and my breeding could be dealt with later. So don't lecture me on transactions, Your Grace. I know exactly what I am to this world. I'm a bank vault in a gold gown. The only person who ever made me feel like more than that was you." He was silent, the mention of his mother's words seeming to land a blow. He looked confused, torn. "Perhaps we're both prisoners of our circumstances," Amelia continued, her voice softer now. "You, trapped by your duty to a past you cannot save. Me, defined by a fortune I didn't earn but cannot escape. I love you for the man who fights for his weavers, who reads terrible poetry, who dances as if it matters. That man is not my enemy. And the mill is not yours. It's not mine. It's just a thing, a machine. The real war is between who we are and who we're afraid of becoming." She moved toward the door, then paused, turning back to him. "I came to England to bag a title. I was proud of it. I thought it was a transaction. But you made me forget the transaction. You made me want something real. I'm sorry I wasn't brave enough to give you the truth in return. Goodbye, William." She walked out, leaving him standing amidst the ruins of his certainties. A month later, Amelia was in her father's study in New York, trying to lose herself in the comforting predictability of ledgers and profit margins. The London season felt like a distant, painful dream. She had left a note for Aunt Cornelia, a brief explanation that the match was not to be, and had sailed on the first available ship. She had not heard a word from the Duke. Her father, sensing her fragility, had not pressed her for details. He simply let her work, the familiar columns of figures a balm to her wounded soul. She was deep in a report on new coking techniques when a servant announced a visitor. "A lord, something miss, from England. Says it's urgent." Amelia's heart lurched into her throat. She had just enough time to stand before the study door opened and the Duke of Alderworth walked in. He looked tired, thinner, but his eyes were the same intense dark pools she remembered. He stopped in the middle of the room, looking utterly out of place amidst the heavy mahogany furniture and the clutter of American commerce. "William," she breathed, "what are you doing here?" He took a step toward her. "I came to see your world," he said simply. "I realized, after you left, that I had been just as guilty as you. I had judged you by your fortune, just as you feared I would. I had assumed that because you were tied to industry you couldn't possibly understand my world. I never considered that I might need to understand yours." He gestured vaguely at the room. "Your father was kind enough to show me the mills in Pittsburgh, the steel mills. They're terrifying and magnificent. They're hot and loud and dangerous. And the men who work there, they're not the broken automatons I imagined. They're proud. They're building something. Your father knows their names, Amelia. He cares if they're hurt. It's not the same as my tenants, but it's a different kind of duty, a different kind of care. Amelia listened, her heart pounding so hard she could scarcely breathe. I went back to Derbyshire, he continued. I looked at that mill with new eyes. I spoke to the workers. Some of them are my tenants' children. They're not miserable. They're hopeful. They're earning wages that let them marry earlier, buy better food, plan for the future. It's not the world I wanted for them, but it's the world they're choosing. He moved closer, and I thought about what you said, about choice, about steering progress instead of trying to stop it. I've been so busy fighting the tide that I never stopped to ask if the people I was fighting for actually wanted me to fight at all. Amelia found her voice. What are you saying? I'm saying I was wrong. Not about everything. I still believe we've lost something precious, something that matters. But I was wrong about you, wrong to judge you for your fortune, wrong to assume that because you came from industry, you couldn't share my values, wrong to let my pride cost me the only woman who ever made me think. He took both her hands in his. I love you, Amelia. I love your mind, your courage, your impossible American optimism. I love that you challenge me, infuriate me, make me see the world differently. I don't care about the mill. I don't care about the money. I care about you. Amelia's eyes filled with tears. Your mother. My mother, he said firmly, will learn to accept that her son has married a woman of intelligence and spirit, or she will spend a great deal of time alone at the Dowager House. The choice is hers. A laugh escaped Amelia, half sob, half joy. You mean it. I mean every word. He dropped to one knee, the second time he had done so, in a different country, in a different world. Amelia Grace Banbridge, will you do me the very great honour of becoming my wife? Not to save my roof, not to salvage my estate, but because I cannot imagine facing the future without you by my side. Amelia looked down at him, this stubborn, passionate, infuriating, magnificent man. The Luddite who had crossed an ocean to find her. The Duke who had learned to see beyond his certainties. The man she loved. Yes, she whispered. Yes, William. 1,000 times, yes. He rose and took her in his arms, and for a long moment they simply held each other, the war between their worlds finally at an end. They were married 6 months later, in a small ceremony at Alderworth Park. The Dowager Duchess attended, her expression suggesting she was sucking on a lemon, but she attended nonetheless. Amelia's father gave her away with tears in his eyes and a settlement so generous it made even the Dowager Duchess's eyebrows rise. The Derbyshire mill continued to operate, its looms clattering day and night, but now its profits helped fund new roofs for Alderworth's tenant cottages, new tools for its farms, new schools for its children. The Duke, to the astonishment of his peers, visited the mill regularly, learning its workings, speaking with its workers, even, on one memorable occasion, allowing himself to be photographed, standing beside one of its massive machines, his expression one of bemused tolerance. I still don't like it, he told Amelia one evening as they walked along the river, the mill's lights gleaming in the distance. But I've stopped trying to destroy it. That's progress, I suppose. That's compromise, Amelia corrected, slipping her hand into his. That's what happens when two worlds meet. He smiled, that rare, transforming smile she had come to love. And when two people do the same? Then, she said, rising on her toes to kiss him, anything is possible. Behind them, the mill hummed its mechanical song. Before them, the ancient hills of Derbyshire rolled toward the horizon, unchanged for centuries. And between them, in the space where their hands joined, a new world was being born, one loom at a time, one waltz at a time, one stubborn, glorious compromise at a time. The Duke's American problem had become his American solution. and they lived, if not entirely at peace with their era, then at least in lively, loving conversation with it, for all their days. The end. Thank you, dear reader of the Regency Gazette, for joining us in another tale of love, intrigue, and whispered ballroom secrets. If today's romance delighted you, kindly bestow a like upon this video. It helps our Gazette reach more lovers of Regency storytelling. For weekly journeys into dukes, debutantes, scandals, and slow-burning devotion, please subscribe to the Gazette and tap the little bell so you are notified the moment the next story is published. Until our next edition, may your days be filled with grace and your nights with the promise of romance.